can you introduce yourself with your full name, what lodge you are from, and how long you have been a member of C.A.C.A?
Okay, my name is Nancy G, and I'm actually a member of the called Peninsula Lodge, which is actually Silicon Valley, but it was called Peninsula because when it was first formed, it was like pre-Silicon Valley, before Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley. So its peninsula is actually San Francisco Peninsula, but they didn't use the word San Francisco, they just used peninsula. So confuses a lot of people, and I suppose one of these days we have to change the name and make it Silicon Valley Lodge. That would probably make more sense.
So today is September 5th, 2025. Right now is 1:45 p.m. How are you feeling about the convention so far? What are you most looking forward to?
It's been very good. I think what I'm looking forward to is all conventions, and this one in particular is just a way to reacquaint with people. We're a national organization, but in a lot of ways we're a big family. And so sometimes these conventions ends up being like a big family reunion. You meet people that you haven't seen for a couple of years and all that, and then that's one thing I look forward to. And then the other is working on some of the issues that have been brought up that we're going to discuss over the next couple of days, and then also election of the new officers for the upcoming year. So a lot to do in a short amount of time.
What feelings or memories come to mind when you think about your first C.A.C.A convention, and what year was that?
I actually don't remember the year because it's been such a long time ago. As far as my personal history, what ended up is my father, Henry G., was initially the charter president of Albuquerque Lodge. And then we moved to California, and then he started in those days it was called Sunnyvale Lodge. It was in the city of Sunnyvale. And that was, and so he was always, for many years involved. And that was, when that was being formed and all that, I was just a young kid. But, when your parents are involved, you kind of get involved anyway. And so once they, prior to, I believe, 1979, they did not allow women to be full members. They had what they called auxiliary membership, and that's where the wives and women they weren't a full member. So in 1971 they passed that resolution that allowed women to become full members. And I remember my dad coming back from the convention and handing me a membership form and says, "You can join now." And that's actually started. And then I don't know, following convention, so that would make it probably 81. That is probably the first one I attended as a delegate. I had been going on and off as kind of member of the family, in there, but not as a member, not participating, but just doing some of the activities, going to the trips and those kind of things.
So I've learned that you were the first woman president of C.A.C.A. Can you tell me a little bit more about that experience and what led you to become president?
As I said, I started fairly early on because Peninsula Lodge is one of the smaller lodges, and so it's easier to become active in the lodge. And so they put me in, I think, as a national rep. In those days called Grand, everything was Grand something, so it was Grand Rep. But so then I started coming to the national board meetings as part of the representative of Peninsula Lodge. And so I got involved with the board, and then once I got involved with the board, then you ended, it's like a lot of organizations that sometimes you volunteer, sometimes you get volunteered. And so they were asking me to do more and more things. And then so first thing it was to get involved as, like secretary or, and then kind of work your way up. But then at some point, then they finally said, or I finally said, I actually at one time said I was going to step away because they wanted me to just stay as secretary, and says, their statement was, when the time is right, we'll move you up. But I said, well, you can only do secretary for so long, and it's also a lot of work. So I actually stepped away. I said, oh, no, I'm not going to do that anymore, and I'm going to just be I stay on the board as a member, but not as a secretary without the responsibility. And then they actually came back to me because they needed help, and then they said, okay, you can do it. And so then I actually ran for president, and that was, I think, 1997. And so it was a little bit difficult because when I first started, I was the only woman out of a board meeting of maybe 30 people, all men and me. and then you have to, when it's like that, you have to kind of build the trust. I mean, people just say, well, what are you doing here? But then you build the trust by doing the work. And then over time, then they figured out that I wasn't going to be disruptive to them. And so then that's what ended up happening, is then I ran and then became president. But then it was still very much the old boys network, where by the time I became president, I think there was maybe 2 or 3 other women on the board, but they were usually representing their local lodges, not in the higher offices, national office. Maybe there was one, and then eventually after I got started, then they realized that we weren't gonna destroy the organization. I guess that's what they were afraid of. And so then more and more got on the board. But still, even for to become national president, it was me, and then it took a while, and then Carolyn became the second, and then just last before Rusty was Melanie. So there's only been 3 of us, but it's taken a while.
Yeah, thank you for leading the path. If you're a member of various nonprofit or other community organizations, what is it about your C.A.C.A community and your involvement that stands apart from those organizations?
I think it goes back, as I said, that this organization is in some ways a family. I mean, it's more than just an organization. I do belong to a number of organizations. I'm an attorney, so I belong to bar associations, and I belong to my office is in Mountain View, so I was active with the Mountain View chamber, things like that. But this organization seems like it has a stronger tie. Like I said, it's family. So like any family, you have arguments, you have disagreements, you don't like something and you fight, but you're still family. At the end of the day, you're just bigger than, the group is bigger than the individual, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I think that's makes us different, us C.A.C.A. different from the other organizations. And I think there's also much more a feeling of the history. You know, we're sitting in this building that's 100 and something years old. Not a lot of organizations that I belong to. I mean, they've been around a long time, but they don't have the history. They just move on. It's just whatever they're doing in the moment, and it's not, you know, what happened in the past and what, you know, and there's no sense of feeling that it's a great thing to have the past. And I think it is.
Yeah, no, I think it is as well. Moving on, what historic or personal event do you credit for inspiring your involvement in C.A.C.A. in civil rights and advocacy or others?
Well, I think it's just, you know, all along, as I said, because my dad was always involved, it was kind of natural to be involved. But, you know, personally, even as a young child, I didn't really, I guess you don't understand, you know, discrimination or racism, or it kind of goes over your head. And I think that the first time I really got affected by it was that we had, you know, our family had, my dad was very good friends with an older Caucasian couple. And we, at this time I was living in Albuquerque, in New Mexico. And we used to go traveling with them, so we would take trips to Yellowstone and, you know, vacations. And so one trip was to Mexico. And so we drove to the Mexican border, and then coming back, we were all in one car, and the Border Patrol, I guess it was what it was. I was only about 6 or 7 or 8 years old, fairly young, stopped our car and made us pull over, and then they started asking us stuff. And the Caucasian couple that was with us, because they're Caucasian, that guy had never experienced anything like that because he's never stopped. I mean, it was just a matter of, you know, they would say, "Where are you from?" and then just let him go. And he got mad. He got really upset and says, "Why are you doing this?" And you know, and I didn't realize at the time that there was anything different. I mean, you know, I just assumed that's what they do, is their authority. But it was basically, I think it was racism, because they stopped us and not him. Or he actually said that, and I remember that. He says, "I come through all the time," because he used to go, you know, the New Mexico border, Mexican border, very close. So he said he used to travel down there kind of often to buy certain things, because some things were cheaper in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And he came and went all the time. And then he said this was the first time he got stopped. And so I think that's the first time I realized that there was, you know, you're treated differently because of the way you look. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I just assume it, you know, as a little kid, you don't think about things like that.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. Following up, founded in 1895, C.A.C.A. is regarded as the oldest continuous civil rights and advocacy organization established for Americans of Chinese ancestries. What do you credit for its longevity and sustainability, and how might you attract younger people to join?
Okay, I think the longevity, I think, is because of our history. Not a whole lot of organizations can point back, you know, and we keep having discussions among ourselves that says, "Wow, I didn't know that this was a result of C.A.C.A. doing something way back in the 30s or 40s or even 20s or you know, the 1800s even." and I think that is our strength. The problem is it's easy to forget. I mean, and I'm hoping for the newer generation, like you guys that are coming up, you know, I don't know if you're taught any of that in school. I was not. I knew nothing growing up in the American school system about any Chinese history. I mean, it wasn't even taught to me, and I'm quite a bit older than you, so I went to school quite a long time ago. They didn't even talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act. The only reason I knew it is through C.A.C.A. It was never mentioned at all in school. They did say, one sentence like the Chinese helped to build the Transcontinental Railroad, but that was the end of it. There was no discussion about any of the backgrounds of the Chinese Americans in the United States. And I mean, I knew some from my grandparents, because they lived through it, and it was just I knew how hard they had and what they had done and what they had endured, but it was never part of any studying or learning or anything like that. And I hope that has changed since then, that there is, and I think that's also what we need to do as an organization, is to make sure that we get people that have, because I think it is also growing. When I was growing up, it was barely had any, even in college, there was Asian organizations or Chinese organizations, but they were more like a social thing. They didn't get together for any civil rights or organizational issues or anything like that. That was specifically to Asian and Chinese, and I think it's changed, and I hope it has changed, and I think it's necessary, because otherwise it's just swept under the rug, like it never happened. And the saying that if you don't what is it, if you don't remember the past, then you're bound to relive it. And I hope we don't have to keep reliving what my grandparents went through and my parents went through. And unfortunately, I think a lot of that, or some of that, is coming back, and we've got to stop that as much as we can.
Yeah, I do think the American education should mention more of Asian American or Chinese American history. I think higher education does a better job with it if you're interested. So I think what you mentioned is correct. What accomplishments of C.A.C.A. are you most proud to have witnessed or been part of?
There's been a lot of things, but actually the current, well, it's not current anymore. The CGM Congressional Gold Medal, getting that through Congress was a big accomplishment, because I think it was very difficult to do, to get enough congressional representatives to approve it. And especially now under this current climate where everything is, they don't even want to talk about diversity and all that. That I don't know that would have been able to be done now, but at least we were able to accomplish that when we did. But it took a whole lot of work.
Yeah. Last and final question, what advice would you give to the next generation of members who want to carry on the mission of C.A.C.A.?
One is, please carry on the mission, and I hope that there's enough interest to want to carry it on. And secondly, I think the younger generation needs to do, if you want to do it differently, do it differently. I think part of the problem that I had, I kind of bridged between the older generation, which was all men, and now it's we barely have gotten into the 21st century, and we're still struggling even with 20th century stuff. And I think there has to be a recognition from the existing establishment that says, if we want you guys to carry on, we have to let you carry on, and you carry it on your way. Don't carry it on our way. And there has to be a recognition on both sides. But on the other hand, the younger generation has to feel like we also still have something to contribute. I mean, you got to work together, and I think that's the main thing. Is we can't avoid the other or try to ignore the other.
No, that's very well said. Thank you so much,
All right.
Nancy, for your
I'm sorry
interview.
to be so long-winded.
No, it's very great information. Thank you so much.